Human, help my mom. My alien mother is trapped in a savage, hunting snare. The alien child's cry. The wind didn't blow. Not even the thinnest draft moved through the canopy of Varela Nine's feral woods. The silence pressed down like a hell breath, too complete, too wrong. Gabriel stood motionless on the crumbling steps outside his dome, eyes narrowed toward the tree limb. A thick haze of spores shimmered in the sun-filtered light, glowing faintly between the alien ferns and overgrown root clusters. He knew this stillness. He'd heard it before. The last time he'd heard a child scream, the silence had come first. That memory, the blur of flame, the pressure suit's hiss, the static punctured transmission begging for evac, flashed behind his eyes like a scar reopened. He blinked it away and listened harder. There, a voice, distant. Another scream followed it, thin and sharp, warped slightly by the spore-thick air. Not a call, a cry. Without thinking, Gabriel grabbed his rebreather and headed into the brush. The dome hissed shut behind him, vines curling over its metallic face like hands dragging down a veil. He pushed through the undergrowth with practiced ease. The terrain here was treacherous, thick mats of mycelium underfoot, vines that responded to warmth, and insects that could bore through flesh in minutes if disturbed. Still, he moved quickly. The voice pulled him forward. He crested a rise, stepped through a curtain of hanging spores, and stopped. Below, a small clearing opened like a wound in the forest floor. There, among curling bloodgrass and broken underbrush, a child knelt beside a figure sprawled on the ground. The woman lay at an awkward angle, her leg twisted grotesquely, caught in the rusted metal jaws of an old off-world hunting trap. The child looked up. Blue skin, long, silken white hair clung to her cheeks, tangled with forest grit. Her orange eyes locked onto his and filled instantly with tears. She took a trembling step forward. "Please help my mother," she cried. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence, but it was clear, desperate, and unmistakably human in its need. Gabriel lifted both hands slowly. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said gently, though his own voice sounded foreign in his ears. He took a step closer, then another. The trap was archaic, off-world, probably poacher tech. The metal was iron-burnished, barbed, and cruelly set to clamp tighter with movement. The woman's foot was mangled, blood seeping into the moss beneath her. She was unconscious, her pale blue face glazed with sweat. A thin chain around her neck held a carved token, something like bone, shaped into a spiral with a small glyph burned into the center. Tribal, maybe ceremonial. She hadn't come from nowhere. He crouched low, trying to ignore how close she was, how fragile she looked. His chest tightened. He hadn't touched another living being in 4 years. His fingers hesitated just above the trap's hinge. What if I break her leg worse? What if I cause more pain? What if she dies and it's my fault again? But the child was watching him. Her tiny hands were clenched into fists at her sides. Gabriel swallowed the fear. Not for himself. For her. He found a flat shard of hardened bark and wedged it under the trap's pressure plate. The metal groaned as he forced it apart. The woman's body spasmed, and she moaned softly. Still alive. He tore off his outer tunic and wrapped it around the shredded foot. His fingers worked fast, numbly, muscle memory taking over. His belt cinched the makeshift bandage tight. "What's your name?" he asked, glancing up at the girl. She sniffled. "Naira. I'm Gabriel. I'm going to carry your mother now, all right? Stay close." Naira nodded and moved beside him, clutching the hem of his coat. Lifting the woman was harder than he expected. Not from the weight. She was lean, almost too light, but from the terror in his own hands. Touching her felt like holding something sacred, something he didn't deserve to be near. Her skin was cool, threaded with glowing veins beneath the surface. Her hair spilled like silk over his arm. "Don't think. Move." They reached the dome within 10 minutes, though the spongy terrain made every step feel slower. Gabriel shoulder pressed the emergency seal open, and the hatch hissed wide to reveal his half-living home. The interior of the dome was more forest than shelter now. Vines stretched across the cracked ceiling, and moss carpeted the floor like lichen lace. Glowing spores clung to every surface. The sterile white of the old terraforming pod had been swallowed by wild green. He cleared a patch of cot with his forearm, brushing away bark shards and tangled root strands. Carefully, he laid her down. Her breathing was shallow. He activated an old MedPod's vital scanner. Thankfully, it still hummed to life. Her oxygen levels were low, circulation erratic. She needed stabilizing fast. He moved with grim focus, pouring antiseptic sap into the wound. The liquid hissed against exposed tissue. She flinched but didn't wake. Naira had crept up beside the cot, watching everything with wide eyes. "Is she going to die?" she whispered. "No," Gabriel said. "Not if I can help it." He wrapped the foot in clean fiber bandage strips, secured with old adhesive mesh. He injected her thigh with a fungal clotter derived from spore resin, painful but effective. Naira clutched her mother's uninjured hand, her small body pressed against her side. Gabriel stepped back. His gloves were slick with blood. His breath was shallow. He moved toward the basin in the far corner and scrubbed his hands raw under recycled water, watching the red swirl down the rusted drain. You did what you had to. But the tremble in his fingertips told him it was more than that. He sat on a bench near the wall, watching her, watching them. Naira's breathing slowed as she drifted into sleep beside her mother. The woman's face remained tense, but less so now. Her chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. Her necklace caught the light. That carved spiral, it wasn't decoration. It meant something. She had a story, a tribe, a past. Gabriel didn't know her name. He didn't know why she'd been alone in the forest. He didn't know if helping her had just dragged him into something bigger than he could handle. But for now, she was safe. And the child, Naira, was safe. That had to be enough. She woke with the dull throb of pain anchored deep in her leg. At first, Cellari thought she was still in the forest, that she'd passed out beneath the bloodgrass with Naira's sobs echoing in her ears. But the air was too still, too clean, and there was warmth, gentle and dry, against her back. Her eyes flickered open. A curved ceiling loomed above her, cracked and partially covered in glowing vines. The smell was unfamiliar. Moss, old metal, faint antiseptic. Her instinct surged first, "Where's Naira?" and she tried to sit up. The pain in her ankle bloomed instantly, white-hot and violent. She gasped and fell back with a strangled cry. "You'll reopen the clot if you move like that," said a voice. She snapped her head toward it. A human male sat just beyond the glow of the moss wall, elbows on his knees, back hunched. His face was shadowed, but the line of his jaw was tense, his shoulders wound-tight like he hadn't slept in days. Solari's eyes darted around the room. "Where is she?" Her voice came out rough, her throat scraped dry. "Safe," he said. "Sleeping. She hasn't left your side since I brought you in." Only then did she notice the small body curled beside her. Naira's white hair fanned across the cot, tangled but clean, her little hands clutching the hem of Solari's tunic. Relief washed over her in a tidal rush. Her heart stuttered with it. She pressed a shaking hand to her daughter's back and let the familiar rhythm of her breathing calm her. The man stood slowly, cautious but not aggressive, and stepped closer into the bioluminescent light. His face was pale, drawn, haunted even, under the sterile light. His cheeks looked hollow, marked faintly by scarred patches near his temple and jawline. "I'm Gabriel," he said. "You're in my dome. I pulled you out of a trap to click south." Cellari narrowed her eyes, unsure if she could trust the name or the man. Her people didn't forget what the Outworlders had brought to Varella's forests. Poachers, scorchwalkers, harvesters with clean gloves and dirty hearts. "How long?" she asked, voice hoarse. 4 days since I found you. You've been in and out. Fever from the wound. I gave you resin-based clotters. They worked eventually." Her gaze shifted to her foot. It was wrapped in clean bandaging, scented faintly of something sharp, almost citrus. The trap was gone. So was the blood. "You burned the fever out of me?" she asked, tone wary. "I cooled it," he said. "Didn't burn anything. That wasn't necessary." She didn't answer. Her fingers threaded gently through Naira's hair. "I wasn't sure you'd make it," he added, quieter now. She wouldn't leave you. I couldn't make her. You shouldn't have touched me, Cellari said after a pause. Not an accusation, more a fact. Gabriel exhaled, the sound barely audible. I didn't have a choice. There was silence between them. Not empty, but tense. The kind that comes when two animals circle, unsure if the other is wounded or dangerous. Then Naira stirred. Her small body rolled, eyes blinking open. She saw her mother and instantly sat up. Mama, she whispered, throwing her arms around Cellari's shoulders. You're awake. You're really awake. Cellari winced but pulled her close, inhaling the scent of her hair, pressing her lips to her daughter's forehead. Are you hurt? She asked. Naira shook her head. No. I was scared, but he helped. He fixed your foot. He gave me food, like warm paste, and soup that smells like tree bark. Gabriel let out the barest breath of a laugh. Cellari looked back at him, gaze hard. You fed her. She was hungry. You let her sleep beside me. She refused anything else. Cellari studied him again. His eyes didn't hold arrogance or pride, just weariness, and something else she couldn't quite place. He didn't carry himself like a poacher, didn't move like a soldier. His hands, when she looked, were steady but calloused, practiced in tending, not breaking. She noticed something else then, a faint tremor in his fingers as he adjusted one of the biolamps. Not fear, something deeper. Hesitation, guilt. She turned to Naira. Did he hurt you? Naira blinked, surprised. No, he was scared, but not scary. Gabriel turned away then, heading toward a cluttered shelf half swallowed by glowing ivy. I'll bring food, he said. You'll need it if the fever's broken. Cellari didn't answer. She watched him move, carefully, like someone who expected rejection with every gesture. When he returned, he handed her a shallow bowl. It was warm, something thick inside, fiber paste with ground protein root and a medicinal spice she couldn't place. She hesitated. Her people didn't eat what wasn't foraged or prepared by one of their own. But she was weak, and Naira had eaten it. She took one bite. Her hands trembled. The warmth hit her throat like fire, but she didn't stop. Gabriel didn't watch her eat. He busied himself, adjusting a broken panel above the water reclamator. Naira watched both of them with wide eyes. Mama, she whispered, his house is broken, but the flowers grow here. I saw one open yesterday. It glowed. Cellari set the bowl down. Her stomach wasn't ready for more. Yes, she said softly. Sometimes broken things make room for life. Gabriel flinched at that, though she hadn't meant it as a blow. The dome lights flickered again. Gabriel's head snapped toward the console. He crossed the room, checked the screen, and tapped a few commands. Cellari watched him. What is it? One of the outer sensors, he murmured. Pinged again. Something moving near the ridge. Could be an animal. Could be hunters. He didn't deny it. Naira's fingers curled into Cellari's hand. We'll stay quiet, Gabriel said. Nothing's coming through the spores easily. Not without coughing up half a lung. Cellari didn't like being trapped. But her ankle was still useless, and Naira's safety came first. She lay back slowly, exhaling as the pain in her leg pulsed again. Gabriel dimmed the lights. You should rest. Cellari hesitated, then nodded once. As she closed her eyes, she felt Naira's small weight curl against her side again, and she let it happen. But even through her exhaustion, she stayed alert. So did Gabriel. He sat against the far wall, half-shadowed, watching the screen, his expression unreadable. But the tremor in his hands had stopped. Morning filtered through the broken panes of the dome like liquid amber, soft and warm where it touched the floor. Spores swirled in the sunbeams, glimmering faintly as they drifted through the air. Inside, the quiet was fragile, too calm, too still, as though any loud breath might shatter it. Cellari sat propped against a wall of vine-draped mesh, her injured leg wrapped and elevated. Her eyes followed Gabriel silently as he moved through his overgrown workstation, avoiding her gaze, but never straying far from where she and Naira lay. He moved like someone who didn't trust himself to be still. He hadn't spoken since offering breakfast. He simply placed the shallow dish beside her, muttered something about heat-tolerant roots, and returned to calibrating an old atmospheric reader that flickered half alive on the wall. Solari's fingers curled around the bowl. It was warm, its surface etched with scratches and signs of long use. The food inside steamed gently, some kind of mashed tuber, seasoned with ground bark and resin oil. The flavor was sharp but oddly comforting. She ate slowly, letting the warmth settle her stomach and dull the pain in her foot. Naira sat beside her, legs folded beneath her like a hatchling bird, chewing noisily. "He always gives it with the sweet sprigs now," she whispered between bites. "Not at first, but then I told him it tasted like old feet." Celery raised an eyebrow. "You said that to him?" Naira grinned. He didn't laugh, but he added the sprigs the next day. Across the room, Gabriel's back remained turned, but his shoulders shifted slightly. Celery set her bowl down. She studied him. Not just the motions, but the edges, the stiffness in his posture, the precision with which he aligned every tool, the pause in his movements when he thought no one was looking. "You live here alone?" she asked, breaking the silence. Gabriel nodded, but didn't turn around. "For years." Naira blinked. "But where's your daughter?" Gabriel froze. The tension that rippled through him was subtle, but unmistakable. He picked up a piece of equipment, then set it back down again without a word. Celery narrowed her eyes, not pressing further, but not retreating either. Gabriel finally spoke, his voice lower than before. "I didn't have a daughter." Naira tilted her head. "Did you want one?" He turned slowly, his expression unreadable. "Sometimes." Then he looked at Celery. "But some people shouldn't be responsible for anyone, especially not after the damage they've done." Celery said nothing. She looked at the scars lining his hands, the tightness in his face, the kind of weight a man only carried when guilt had fused in a bone. She shifted, wincing at the flare of pain. Gabriel was beside her before she could object. He reached down, but stopped just short of touching her foot. "May I?" he asked, voice quiet. Celery hesitated, her body tensed on instinct. Then slowly she nodded. His hands were careful, steady but reverent, as if he feared her skin might shatter beneath his touch. He peeled back the outer wrap and checked the wound. Her blood had stopped pooling, but the bruising was deep, discoloring the skin in jagged purple and gray streaks. "You'll walk again," he said, "but not today. Maybe not this week." Celery studied his face as he worked. There was no arrogance in him, no demand for praise. Just focus, restraint. "You used to be something else," she said quietly. "Something important." Gabriel nodded once. "Terraforming botanist. Colonial division. I helped design the sea banks and moisture traps used on early moons like this one." "Help design." He gave a bitter smile. "And help destroy. One of our early prototypes caused a cascade failure on a nearby colony. Spores became hyperactive. Temperature regulation collapsed. Flora mutated. The environment turned toxic. We lost everyone." "Not we," Celery said. "You blame yourself." His hands paused. "I wasn't the only one who made the choices," he said, as if repeating something he'd tried to believe before. "But I was the one who signed off on the deployment. I believed it would work." That belief killed people. Naira had gone quiet beside them. Even at her age, she understood enough to keep still when pain was being spoken aloud. Celery exhaled slowly. "And so you buried yourself in this place." "No one was going to listen to me after that. And I didn't want them to." He finished rewrapping her foot and stood. "I came here because I couldn't imagine being around people again." Celery tilted her head. "Then why save us?" Gabriel looked at her, and for a moment, he seemed genuinely at a loss. "You screamed," he said finally. "Or Naira did. And I moved before I could think. It wasn't choice. It was reflex." Celery stared at him a moment longer, then nodded. "You don't sound like the ones who hunt us." His eyes darkened. "I'm not like them." She gestured toward the vines that crawled along the ceiling, their tips glowing faint green. "Your dome's been claimed by the forest. It's alive. It's infected," he said flatly. "Every system is compromised. But I stopped trying to fight it. Now I just manage it." "Adaptation," Celery said. "The forest likes you." Gabriel didn't answer, but his mouth quirked faintly. Naira stood up then and scampered over to a patch of moss near the wall. She knelt, poking at a set of bulbous fungal blooms. "Look," she said, "this one opened yesterday. It sprayed stuff at Gabriel and made him sneeze." Solari's eyes widened just slightly. "It sprayed you?" Gabriel raised his brows in mild annoyance. "It startled me. That's all." She laughed for 5 minutes, he added. Naira beamed. It was funny. Solari found herself smiling. Small, restrained, but real. The first since the forest. Then, from the console, a soft ping echoed. Gabriel crossed the room quickly. His expression shifted. "Something?" Solari asked. "Outer ridge motion sensor." Again, he studied the readout. "Whatever it is, it's coming closer." Slowly. Same path. Solari stiffened. "Poachers? I don't know yet. Could be animals. Could be machines. But they're testing our perimeter." Naira moved closer to her mother, slipping her hand into Solari's. Gabriel turned toward them. "We'll stay quiet. If it's hunters, they won't come through during the day. The spores are too dense right now. Night's when they try." Solari nodded once. "Then we wait." Gabriel retrieved a blanket and handed it to Naira. "Rest if you can." He paused, then met Solari's gaze. "You're safe here. For now." Solari didn't reply. But when Naira lay beside her and pulled the blanket over both of them, she didn't resist. Gabriel returned to the bench, watching the console in silence. The tension in the room didn't lift, but something had shifted again. The way he touched her foot, the way she led him. A small seed of trust had been planted. And like everything in this strange, tangled place, it had the potential to grow. The storm rolled in without warning. One moment, the air beyond the dome shimmered with spore light and the faint scent of blooming barkroot. The next, the sky darkened with churning fungal clouds that stretched like bruises across the horizon. A low, pulsing hum vibrated through the floor, the kind that signaled the spore-burst storms that came once every few cycles. Dense, suffocating waves of airborne life thick enough to smother a man's lungs if caught outside unprotected. Gabriel locked the final seal just before the outer pressure gauge screamed. Inside the dome, light dimmed to a sickly yellow. Rain didn't fall, not like water, but in sheets of dust-laden spore flakes that clung to every surface. The atmosphere moaned with chemical tension, the air outside shifting too rapidly for sound to move clearly. Even the forest, usually wild and loud with life, fell quiet beneath the storm's weight. Solari sat by the reinforced inner wall, her injured leg propped up on a folded cushion. Naira lay curled against her, finally asleep after a restless morning. The silence that filled the dome was thicker than the storm. Heavier somehow, like it carried the weight of too many unspoken things. Gabriel leaned against the moss-lined console, arms folded tightly across his chest. "How long will it last?" Solari asked, her voice low but steady. "Could be a day. Could be 2, Gabriel replied. "It'll burn through quick if the winds shift north. If not," he gestured vaguely toward the dome, "we stay in here and wait it out." Solari nodded, then added, "Storms like this don't reach the upper cliffs." Gabriel looked at her. "You know the forest that well?" She shrugged. "We've lived near this moon's southern basin since I was a girl. My people mapped the safe paths. Every plant, every hollow, every shift in the air, we remember all of it. Because forgetting gets you killed." Gabriel's brow furrowed. "Your tribe? I've never encountered any records of it in the Central Colonial Archives." "No," Solari said simply. "You wouldn't have." There was a pause. "My mate was a wayfarer," she said, her voice softer now, tinged with a quiet rhythm. "We followed the old ground winds, harvesting only what regrew." He taught Naira to track scent trails and sleep in the trees. Then one night, we heard the fire sticks. The sky tore open. Men dropped in from metal ships. They weren't looking for us, but they didn't care if we were in the way. Gabriel didn't speak. Solari continued. "We ran. He ran slower. I carried Naira. He stayed behind." She looked down at her daughter, brushing a strand of white hair from her cheek. "He told me not to stop." Her eyes remained dry, but her fingers trembled faintly where they rested on the cot. They wanted you for something? Gabriel asked, keeping his voice gentle. Forge remarked, she said. Our people have instincts. Trained, passed down. We know what heals, what kills. And there are those who would take that without asking. Gabriel nodded. Knowledge is just another resource to some people. Just another thing to strip mine. Cellari tilted her head. And you? What did they take from you? Gabriel hesitated. The dome hummed faintly around them, storm winds rattling the external frame. I led a project on Yoan 3, he said. Terraforming moon colonies. Varela was one of them. We developed adaptive flora, plants that could balance moisture, regulate air density, self-sustaining systems. Cellari raised a brow. Sounds useful. It was, he said, until it wasn't. He turned to the console, running a hand through his hair. There was a flaw in the sequence. One genome corrupted the next. A fungal cascade we didn't predict. It spread to the settlements, accelerated decomposition. People breathed it in. It altered their lungs, their skin. They died slowly. Cellari said nothing. I watched a town of 200 dissolve in 3 days. By the time we understood what we'd done, it was already too late. I sent out the recall signal myself. Then I disappeared. Gabriel looked down at his hands. I haven't touched another person since. Until you. The quiet that followed felt more honest than anything spoken. I thought I buried that man, he said. But when I saw Naira beside you, screaming for help, I didn't think. I just moved. You still carry guilt, Cellari said. I don't think it ever left, he replied. They sat in silence. Not heavy this time, just present. Then, softly, Cellari reached out and touched his hand. Gabriel froze. She didn't grip, didn't pull, just laid her fingers lightly against the back of his palm. Her touch was warm. You helped, she said. Not just her. Me too. That matters. He looked down at where her skin met his. Blue against pale. Steady. No shaking. I didn't expect forgiveness, he said. This isn't forgiveness, Cellari said. It's trust. A seed of it. Outside, the storm pulsed again. The dome shivered. Naira stirred in her sleep and mumbled something about leaves with faces. Gabriel smiled faintly. She dreams out loud. She always has, Cellari said, even before she had words. The two of them stayed like that for a long time. Cellari's hand resting against his. Gabriel watching her not as a patient, not as a stranger, but as someone alive, someone real. He didn't pull away, and she didn't let go. The storm had passed 3 days ago, but its memory lingered in the soil and air. The forest, always alive, now breathed with renewed heat, pulsing with energy as if stirred awake by the chaos. Gabriel had repaired the upper filtration panel that morning, sweat pouring from his neck as he wrestled old wiring back into submission. The dome creaked and hissed in places it never used to, but it held. Somehow it always held. He turned from the console and looked out through the broken visor port toward the garden, where two familiar silhouettes moved among the moss beds. Cellari was walking, truly walking, for the first time without support. She no longer leaned on the cane he'd carved. It sat unused beside the door, half buried in soft earth, forgotten like an old fear. Her steps were careful but determined, and Gabriel could see the old tension in her shoulders replaced by quiet control. Naira bounded ahead of her, hair undone and feet bare, her laughter echoing off the curved interior of the dome like a song the place had forgotten how to hold. She dragged a makeshift cart made from salvage bin parts, filled with water pods and hand-cut spade tools. Careful near the edge, Cellari called softly. I know, Mama. Naira chirped back. Gabriel stepped outside, wiping his hands on a scrap of cloth. The heat hit him instantly, thick with humidity and the scent of ripe bark fruit. He moved toward the beds where Cellari was kneeling, trimming a row of resilient coil grass with a hand-forged blade. I saw you, he said. She looked up, shielding her eyes with one hand. Doing what? Walking, he said, unaided. A small smile tugged at her lips, not coy, but quietly proud. It's not perfect yet. Gabriel crouched beside her. Still, it's real. She handed him a bundle of cut grass. Then helped me finish the western rows. They're ready for transplanting. They worked in tandem, him loosening the soil, her placing seedlings. The rhythm settled between them like a breath shared in silence. No words, just presence. At one point, she reached a steady, a shifting vine, and their hands brushed. The contact was brief, but neither flinched. I used to think healing was a straight line, Gabriel said after a while, his voice low. That once the bleeding stopped, it meant you were better. Cellari didn't answer right away. She pressed a coil grass bulb deeper into the soil. It's not, she finally said. It's a spiral. You circle the same pain, but each time you come back to it, you're stronger. Gabriel nodded. I think this place knew that long before I did. From the far side of the dome, Naira yelped as a cluster of spores exploded beneath her foot, showering her in purple dust. She staggered back, blinking in surprise, then burst into laughter. Did you see that? It popped. Are you all right? Cellari asked. Naira struck a dramatic pose. I am dusted and glorious. Gabriel laughed, a genuine sound that surprised even him. She gets that from you, Cellari murmured. He shook his head. She gets that from life. She's growing in all directions. So are you, she said softly. He looked at her then. Really looked. Her pale blue skin glowed where the sunlight caught it. Faint veins shimmered beneath the surface, pulsing like the roots of the forest that surrounded them. She didn't wear armor, not anymore. Only a woven wrap at her waist and a soft cotton shirt he'd salvaged and resized for her. He'd seen her bloody, feverish, fighting to protect a child. But here, planting, she looked more like herself than ever before. Whole, rooted. You know, she said, in my people's stories, when you bury something broken in the right kind of soil, it doesn't decay. Gabriel raised a brow. What happens? It transforms, becomes part of something new. There was a weight in her words, one that pressed directly into the center of his chest. I thought I had to forget everything to move forward, he admitted. The research, the failures, even the names of the people who trusted me. But maybe remembering is part of the growth. She touched his arm. Her fingers were warm and sure. Then let it grow. Here, with us. Naira had wandered back, now carrying a fistful of pink fungus caps and twirling in place, trailing petal dust behind her like a comet. Doc, she shouted, I found the smile mushrooms. The ones that smell like cake. They smell like yeast rot, Gabriel corrected. But cake rot, she insisted. Cellari chuckled. Just let her believe it. It makes her happy. Naira stopped twirling and stared at them both. Are you going to kiss again? Gabriel blinked. We didn't kiss. Naira tilted her head. But you're standing really close. That's always before a kiss in stories. Gabriel looked at Cellari. Her expression was unreadable, but there was amusement in the lines of her eyes. She stepped forward. Slowly, deliberately. Gabriel didn't move. When she reached him, she rested her hands gently on his chest. Do you want to? The question hung between them, open, vulnerable, not desperate but sure. Yes, he said, without hesitation. She leaned in and pressed her lips to his. It wasn't fevered or forced. It was slow, reverent, like sealing a truth that had been whispered for weeks. His hands found her waist, steadying them both as the world fell silent. Somewhere nearby, Naira made a gagging noise. You're going to melt the mushrooms, she said. Cellari broke the kiss with a laugh against his mouth. Gabriel smiled. Worth it. They spent the rest of the day planting new rows, root fruit in the north corner, climbing seed lace near the trellis. Gabriel fetched water, while Cellari showed Naira how to shape the soil to trap condensation. By late afternoon, their hands were stained green and gold, and their backs ached from effort. But no one complained. At dusk, they sat beneath the open dome panel, legs stretched out, the air cool and smelling of moss and ash fruit. Naira dozed with her head in her mother's lap, snoring faintly. Gabriel leaned back on his elbows, watching the sky fade from copper to indigo. Cellari's fingers played absent-mindedly with his hair. I never thought peace would look like this, he said. It doesn't have to be perfect, she replied. Just real. He turned his head and kissed the inside of her wrist. And for the first time in his life, Gabriel realized he wasn't surviving anymore. He was living. The first sign was not sound, but absence. The birds stopped calling just after dusk. The spores in the western canopy, which normally floated like drifting embers, vanished from the air, as if the forest itself had paused to hold its breath. Inside the dome, Gabriel was oiling the hinges on the backup hatch when the motion alert chimed. Not once, 3 times. Steady, deliberate. He didn't curse, didn't speak. He wiped his hands on his shirt and crossed to the console with a calmness that felt like it belonged to someone else. He already knew what the sensor would say. They were back. Outside, the ridgeline glowed faintly on the monitor, shadows drifting between spore fields in practice formation. Human silhouettes. 3 of them. No more hesitation. No more scouting. This time they were coming in. Gabriel stared at the blinking interface, a growing stillness settling in his chest. His body moved automatically, switching the dome to lockdown mode, rerouting power to the inner doors, dimming external lights to 0. He turned and found Cellari already behind him. She held Naira's hand. The girl's white hair mussed from sleep. Neither spoke. "They're close," he said. "Too close." Cellari's eyes sharpened. "We can't fight them here." "I've laced the perimeter," Gabriel said. "Hidden spores, motion-activated traps. It'll buy us time." Cellari nodded. But not much. Her hand reached instinctively for the cane, but stopped short. Instead, she straightened her spine and stepped forward on her own, favoring the leg but walking. Gabriel watched her for half a heartbeat. "You don't need to." "I do," she interrupted. "We run, they'll follow. We hide, they'll burn the forest to find us." Her voice was steady, but he could see the tremor in her fingers. Not fear, conviction. She looked at Naira. "Go to the crawl passage, just like we practiced." Naira hesitated. "I want to stay. Now," Cellari said, not unkindly. Naira's lower lip trembled, but she obeyed, slipping toward the rear hatch and vanishing into the low-access duct lined with padded vine and moss. Gabriel had reinforced it days ago, just in case. Now was the only exit that mattered. He turned back to Cellari. "You should go with her." "So should you." "I can't," he said. "This dome, this place, they'll tear through it if I don't hold them off." She stepped closer. "You told me not to run." He blinked. She touched his chest, just over the old scar above his ribs. "You told me I didn't have to be afraid anymore." "I meant it." "Then don't ask me to leave you now." Gabriel swallowed. For a moment, the fear that had ruled his life for years threatened to rise again. Fear of loss, of failure, of hurting someone he couldn't save. He looked into her eyes. She wasn't unafraid. She was choosing something stronger than fear. And he knew then he couldn't protect her by shielding her. He had to stand beside her. He nodded. "We'll hold them. Together." The forest was thick with vapor and tension. Gabriel moved ahead, barefoot on the moss to silence his steps. Cellari followed close behind, her movements low and precise, the short blade in her hand made from shaped resin and steel. They reached the southern flank just as the first poacher emerged, tall, masked, rifle slung at his hip. He swept the clearing with a motion sensor, unaware that he'd already stepped across the trigger line. Gabriel threw the flare beacon. It detonated mid-air in a burst of blinding light, illuminating the poacher's silhouette against the trees. He screamed, clutching his visor, stumbling back just as Cellari surged forward with speed born of desperation. Her blade found his side, just deep enough to disable, not kill. He crumpled. From the ridge, the second and third men shouted. Footsteps thundered through brush, weapons raised. Gabriel grabbed Cellari's hand, pulling her behind a fungal wall that exhaled spores when disturbed. The mist rose thick and yellow, burning the eyes and lungs of those who didn't wear protection. One of the attackers fired blindly. The shot cracked bark and ricocheted off a root node. Gabriel reached into his belt and pulled the glass vial. "Cover your mouth," he said. He hurled the vial into the underbrush. It shattered with a sharp crack, releasing a billowing cloud of reactive pollen that ignited on contact with the poacher's boot prints. Flames danced across the moss like spilled lightning. Screams followed, then retreating footsteps, then silence. Only the breathing of the forest remained. They didn't return that night. Gabriel and Cellari moved through the perimeter twice, confirming no heat signatures, no motion, just the echo of violence and a few drops of blood in the grass. At sunrise, they returned to the dome. Naira was waiting near the greenhouse, eyes wide, face pale. When she saw them, she ran. Gabriel bent to catch her, and she crashed into his chest, sobbing. I thought, we're here, he whispered, holding her tight. We're safe. Cellari crouched beside them, pulling both into her arms. They stayed like that until the dome's light sensors activated, warming the air with simulated daylight. A soft breeze stirred the hanging moss curtains. Life resumed. In the days that followed, they rebuilt. Together. The southern wall, scorched by fire, was patched with heat-treated glass. The ruined traps were replaced with smarter ones, non-lethal but loud. Gabriel added layered filtration to the dome's upper vents, while Cellari reseeded the outer beds with calming herbs that masked their scent. Naira painted a warning on the tree near the trail. It wasn't in any known language, just streaks of color and a spiral marker people used to say, "This place is claimed." On the fourth day, they stood at the edge of the clearing, watching new sprouts emerge from charred soil. Cellari leaned into Gabriel's side. Her legs still ached, but she no longer winced with every step. You fought for this place, she said. For us. He looked down at her hand in his. You did too. I used to think healing meant isolation, she continued. That I could protect Naira by keeping everyone else out. That love was a luxury we couldn't afford. He didn't speak. But you show me something else, she said. Love isn't a risk. It's the thing worth risking for. Gabriel turned to face her. You're not running anymore. Neither are you. Then she kissed him, without hesitation, without fear. Naira groaned behind them. Not again. You two are worse than moss birds. Gabriel laughed into Cellari's mouth. She pulled away with a grin. I like moss birds, she said. Let's go plant more, Naira declared. The sky plants are ready. Sky plants? Gabriel asked. Obviously, she said. They grow tall enough to tickle the clouds. Cellari raised a brow. And who told you that? Naira grinned. I made it up, but you believed it. Gabriel lifted her easily onto his shoulders as they walked toward the greenhouse. Well then, let's grow the sky. Cellari reached for his hand. And this time, he didn't hesitate. Not to hold it. Not to believe. Not to belong. The sky over Varela. 9 opened like a slow breath. Mist rose in spirals from the warm soil, catching the dawn light and scattering it in fractured beams across the moss-veined dome. The air smelled of damp bark and bloom dust, clean, rich, and full of promise. The forest had stilled after the chaos, its pulse settling into rhythm again, cautious but alive. Inside the dome, everything was different, and yet the same. Gabriel stood at the edge of the greenhouse, sleeves rolled to his elbows, soil dark under his fingernails. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, exhaled, and leaned back to admire the rows he'd spent the morning planting. His breath came slower now, measured, grounded. Behind him, laughter echoed. Naira sprinted across the clearing, her arms flailing like wings, barefoot and shrieking with joy as Cellari chased her around the moss beds, mock scolding in her native tongue. Gabriel smiled and bent down to inspect a leaf curl. Not for disease, just out of habit. The plant was healthy, strong, like everything else they'd rebuilt. It had been weeks since the poachers came, long enough for the land to settle, for the memory of violence to fade into something distant, like a dream dissolving in light. Cellari's voice brought him back. You're not supervising. We could be planting weeds. He turned. She stood in the sun, hands on her hips, hair braided back in the style of her people, long white strands woven with strips of dried vine. Her skin gleamed, and her eyes held the dry amusement that always accompanied her challenges. He wiped his palms on his tunic. I trust you. Mostly. She stepped toward him. Mostly, he tilted his head. You do have a tendency to name plants based on how they look instead of their gene map. They respond better to names that mean something, she said, not missing a beat. And your science words sound like sneezing. He grinned. They are precise. They are lonely. Gabriel opened his mouth to respond, but Naira interrupted. Mama, Doc, come see what I made. She stood near the base of the spiral trellis, pointing proudly to a circle of smooth stones she'd arranged into a rough heart. Inside, she planted one of every flower she could find: red spore caps, bloom vine buds, even a stubby skyroot sprout she'd insisted would grow tall enough to reach the moon. Cellari walked over and crouched beside her. What is this? A wishing garden, Naira said, so no one forgets what we fought for. Gabriel's breath caught in his throat. Cellari looked up at him, eyes soft. From your daughter's mouth. Gabriel felt something shift in his chest. The word, daughter, landed like a stone dropped into still water. Not just a title, a truth. Later, after Naira had gone inside to prepare lunch with her usual chaos of overspiced root stew, Gabriel and Cellari sat by the stone circle. The afternoon light danced through the trellis above, casting shifting shadows across the ground. Cellari leaned her shoulder into his. Do you still hear it? Hear what? The guilt. Gabriel took a long breath. Sometimes, but it's quieter, like a ghost losing its name. She reached over, lacing her fingers through his. And the fear. He looked at her. Gone. Or maybe changed. Ow! It's not about failing anymore, he said. It's about not missing this. Not missing a single moment of it. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. I used to believe I would raise Naira alone, she murmured. That there was no world where she'd be allowed joy. Safety. A father. Gabriel turned to her. I didn't know I could be that. You already are, she said. You just had to grow into it. Their lips met, not rushed or hungry, but patient. Familiar. He tasted the warmth of earth and breath, the certainty of something that no longer needed to be earned. When they parted, Cellari pulled something from her belt pouch. It was a carved wooden token, simple, worn, no larger than a thumbprint. A sigil from her people, a spiral wrapped in a crescent. I carried this when I fled with Naira, she said. It belonged to my mate. Gabriel's heart stilled. You don't have to. I'm not giving it to you, she said, smiling faintly. I'm placing it. Here. She reached forward and gently pressed the token into the soil beneath the heart of Naira's garden. We carry him, she said, but we grow forward. Gabriel nodded. Together, they sat until the light shifted gold, and Naira reappeared on the porch, face smeared with herb paste and triumph. Dinner, and I only burned half of it. Cellari stood, brushing her hands off. Progress. Gabriel followed, but paused before entering the dome. He walked to the outer garden, where a short wooden post had been staked days earlier. Its surface was still blank, raw wood untouched. He took the carving knife from his belt and, with deliberate care, etched the words he'd carried in his mind since the night the poachers came. The garden of second chances. When he returned inside, the scent of food, overseasoned, wild, and absolutely perfect, wrapped around him like a welcome. Cellari stood by the stove, stirring with one hand, while Naira sat cross-legged on the floor, humming an improvised tune to the rhythm of her spoon against a tin bowl. Gabriel crossed the room and kissed Cellari's temple without a word. She leaned into him, and for a long moment, nothing else existed. No history, no damage, only breath, only heat, only now. They sat together that night beneath the glow of the old solar lamps, eating stew that tasted better for being shared. Naira fell asleep halfway through her second bowl, curled against Gabriel's side, small fingers clutching his tunic. Cellari rested her head on his shoulder and whispered, "This is home." Gabriel kissed her hair and whispered back, "Yes, it is." Outside, the stars began to pierce through the high canopy, flickering through leaves and spores, watching quietly as something whole and real finally took root. The forest no longer felt haunted. It felt like it had been waiting for them. The forest had entered its flowering season again. Clusters of fireleaf blossoms hung heavy on the upper canopy, their scent syrupy and warm, drifting down into the clearing like invisible honey. The air hummed with pollinators, long-winged hover moths and glitter wasps that moved from plant to plant in patterns Naira claimed to understand perfectly. It's math, she'd explained that morning, scooping spores with both hands and tossing them into the wind. Like dancing, but for pollen. Gabriel hadn't argued. He'd simply watched her run barefoot through the garden, arms out, hair shining like starlight in the sun. She was taller now, stronger. Her laugh was the same, but there was something behind it, awareness, curiosity, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. Months had passed since the poachers came and went. And in that time, peace had rooted itself deeper than either adult had expected. Now, the dome was not a shelter. It was a home. Salari was kneeling at the edge of the greenhouse, tending to the new line of vine fruit that curled up the mesh fencing. Gabriel was beside her, sorting harvested spore pods into storage pouches, his hands moving with casual precision. And Naira? She was doing her best to wear them both out. "Watch me." "No, really watch," she shouted, poised on top of a flat stone by the north garden bed. Salari turned. "We are watching." Naira planted her feet, arms wide like wings. "This is called the triple flip-drop twist." "It's a somersault," Gabriel said with a small smirk. "It's advanced," Naira said, glaring. "You need at least one alien parent to do it." "Then I suppose you qualify," Salari replied dryly, brushing hair from her forehead. Naira inhaled, then launched herself forward in a flurry of limbs. She tumbled off the stone, rolled once, stood, and flung her arms in the air. "Tada!" Gabriel clapped. Salari whistled between two fingers. Naira beamed, cheeks flushed with triumph. Then she looked at Gabriel, eyes narrowing. There was a hesitation in her expression, not uncertainty, but preparation. She stepped closer, brushing dirt from her elbows, and stood just in front of him. Her voice was quieter now. "Did you see the landing?" "I did," Gabriel said. "Clean arc. Stuck the dismount." Naira nodded. "Good." A pause. Then, "Did you know you're my dad?" Gabriel's breath caught. The word landed between them like the gentlest blow, startling in its softness, devastating in its simplicity. He looked at Salari, who was frozen in place. Her mouth parted slightly, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. He turned back to Naira. Her gaze didn't waver. "You called me Doc for a long time," Gabriel said carefully. "Are you sure?" Naira reached up, placed her small hand on his wrist. "You don't feel like Doc anymore. You feel like mine." Gabriel didn't know what to say. So instead, he knelt, drew her into a hug, and pressed his forehead to hers. "Thank you," he said. His voice cracked, but he didn't hide it. Naira shrugged like it was obvious. "You were already doing all the work. I just made it official." Behind them, Salari pressed a hand to her chest. Not because of surprise, because of what it meant, what it confirmed. Later, as dusk crept across the treetops and fireleaf petals fluttered down like slow-burning embers, Salari and Gabriel sat together on the porch with Naira curled between them, half asleep from too much sun and running. "She said it," Gabriel murmured. "She did," Salari said, voice barely a whisper. "And you didn't run." "I didn't even flinch." She smiled, brushing her knuckles along his cheek. "That's growth." Gabriel leaned into the touch, then glanced down at Naira. "You ever think, maybe she shouldn't be the only one?" Salari raised her brow. "You mean?" "I mean," he said, shifting to look at her more fully. "This garden's doing well. The dome's stable. She's strong. We've carved something solid out of dust and fire." Salari's expression was unreadable for a moment. Then she looked down at Naira, at the slow rise and fall of her chest, at the pale lashes fluttering in sleep. "She wants someone to boss around," she said thoughtfully. Gabriel chuckled. "She already bosses me around." "True," Salari murmured. "But you don't push back." They sat in quiet for a while, listening to the slow whir of nighttime insects beyond the dome, the low call of dusk birds, the drip of dew forming on leaf edges. Then Salari spoke again, softer this time. "I used to think I wouldn't survive losing one more person." "I know. But now," she turned to him, eyes shining, "now I think we could grow again. Not to replace. Just to add." Gabriel nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "You think the world can hold it?" "I think we can." He reached for her hand and kissed the back of it. "Then let's not rush." But let's dream out loud. Naira shifted between them in her sleep, murmuring something about root cake and flying deer. Gabriel looked at Cellari again. If we do, maybe we build something even stronger than survival. Cellari rested her head on his shoulder. A second child, not because we're escaping the past, but because we believe in the future. And beneath them, the earth stayed warm. The garden swayed gently in the breeze. The dome, worn and alive, held fast. Above it all, the stars looked down, not distant but close, like they were listening, like they were waiting. The end.